G'day guys, Tom here from the Innovation Agency. Today I want to talk to you about the three main types of apps and which is best suited to your project. But before we do that, we need to talk about how your project looks. And this, when we're initially talking to people about their projects, instantly they want to know how much it costs. And unfortunately with apps, it's not as simple to give you a quote as it is for a website. Now, most people here who are watching this have either been quoted for a website or understand websites and how they function. Far less complex than an app, and that is reflected in the cost of development. This is why you can get websites built quite cheap, but you can't with apps. Even if you outsource apps, they're going to cost you quite a lot of money, and the reason for that is there's a lot of work involved. The hours involved in developing apps is huge, and I'll explain that in a sec. But when it comes to basically planning your project, you need to think about things like who are you trying to target? What devices are they using? Is your project going to evolve over time, or do you know exactly how it's going to look, function, and run? Function, run, same thing. Those are really important for deciding which is the best type for you. So I'll explain that further. We'll go with native apps. Native apps is the first one we'll talk about. Native apps are apps that are built in the native language for that device. So iOS and Android have different languages. There are exceptions to the rule, which I'll talk about, but generally speaking, the native languages is what they are. You build in those languages because they're best for the device. And native apps allow you to do things like push send updates where the user gets the update on their phone. They don't have to re-download it. They just click update, it updates it on their phone. Push notifications as well, being able to send notifications to your users. All those little individual bits and pieces are done through native. So if your app is going to be ever evolving and you're going to need to contact your user base or send notifications to your user base, then native is the way to go. Now, the unfortunate thing about native is that if you want to target both Android and iOS users, the app has to build twice. Has to be built twice, unfortunately. And that's why the cost is so expensive. If I will explain how you can keep that cost down if you know exactly how your app's going to function. But yeah, generally speaking, most people will go with a native app because it needs to be constantly updated and constantly evolve. Now, if you know exactly how your app's going to function, look, and doesn't need to be constantly updated, it just, once it's built, it's done, it sits on the App Store, awesome. You can build what's called a hybrid app. Now, hybrid app is built in a language that isn't native, and generally speaking, it's PHP. So you build the app or the basis of the app in PHP, and when it's finished, it spits out the two different files, IPA and APK. Sorry, I meant to blank that. And then you upload those to the App Store. Now, that's really good, but if your users have downloaded, you've got a good user base, and they're downloading it, and they've had a great time, and you decide, oh, I really want to add this function in. Unfortunately for you, it means that they're going to have to delete the old version off and download the new one from the App Store, which, as you can see, can be very, very annoying for a lot of people and yourselves in the long run. So we only recommend hybrid apps for people that know exactly how the app's going to run, and it is for more simplistic apps like informational apps. Yeah, so have a think about that when you're planning. If your app is going to evolve, you cannot do a hybrid app. It has to be native. If it is quite simple, then hybrid app is an option. And yeah, with hybrid apps, so when I say that it has to be, you can't update it. You can update content. So we've built an app for Currumbin Clinic where its functionality is quite basic. It's got menus. It's basically a website for your phone, but it's difficult to explain the difference between a website and an app quite simply and quickly. So we'll just leave it anyway. It functions like a website in the sense that it's got menus. You click on them, you get taken to different pages, right? But all the content in that app can be updated constantly. So it's evolving in the sense of content, but not in terms of functionality. So as long as you know how it's going to function, you can always update the content within the app, as you go. So that's how a hybrid app works. Now, a web app. Web apps are designed mostly for computers, for browsers. So this is your Firefox, Chrome, Mozilla, and Internet Explorer. And these are things like realestate.com.au, your online banking, carsales.com.au, and Gumtree. Prime examples of web apps. Now, they all have app versions now. That's cool, but they were built initially for websites. They were essentially complex websites. and they were converted into apps, which is a lot easier to do. It's harder to go the other way, build an app and then have the website built, because the functionality doesn't really talk to each other. Building the website first and then building what's called an API that talks to the app is a lot easier. So if you have a project that can be built on a web basis, and you think that down the track you might add an app as well, awesome. Perfectly suited is a web app. Now this is some other examples of this would be like your SEO tools, for instance, that we use. You jump on, you put in the URL, it scans it, and it spits out a score for their SEO. Fantastic. Doesn't need to be done on a mobile. We do that on our desk at work, so we don't need a mobile version of it. And that's where web apps are so important. Website, application, web app. So if your project doesn't need to be on a mobile, web apps the best option, and they do tend to be cheaper than native apps. They are cheaper than native apps because you're only building one. But hybrid apps are definitely the cheapest in most cases. The best way to think about a web app is a really, really complex website. That's the best way to describe it. So if your project is quite simple, and you're mainly targeting mobile users, hybrid app. If your idea is your project is very complex and it's going to constantly evolve and you're targeting predominantly mobile devices, native. If your project is either simple or complex but can target predominantly website users, then a web app's the best option. And of course, a web app can be converted to communicate with an app quite easily. So have a think about that when you're planning. Who's it targeting? The functionality, do you know exactly how it's going to run? Is it going to be updated down the track? And it doesn't need a mobile version. If not, you don't need an app per se. Yeah, I hope that's helpful, and I look forward to speaking to you again. Cheers, guys. See ya.